Verrückt Waterslide Horror. On August 7, 2016, at Schlitterbahn Water Park in Kansas City, riders climbed the 168-foot Verrückt and loaded into three-person rafts for a run billed at speeds over 60 miles per hour. During the ride, the raft-carrying 10-year-old Caleb Schwab rode over the second hump, went airborne after cresting that rise, and slammed into a metal support for the overhead safety netting, throwing the raft's occupants and causing catastrophic neck trauma to Caleb. Investigators and reconstruction later noted an uneven seating and weight distribution on that raft. Caleb had been permitted to sit in the front, while two much heavier adults sat behind him. And engineers concluded that the combination of the hill profile and that loading made the raft prone to becoming airborne, even though total weight stayed under the published limit. Caleb suffered fatal neck injuries at the scene and later died. The slide was closed immediately, later dismantled, and the Schwab family reached a nearly $20 million settlement with companies tied to the ride, while subsequent criminal indictments and civil proceedings followed, and regulators moved to tighten oversight and inspection rules. Mindbender roller coaster accident. On June 14, 1986, at the West Edmonton Mall's indoor Galaxyland, the Mindbender roller coaster suffered a catastrophic failure when the wheel assembly on the fourth car sheared loose mid-ride, causing that rear car to derail and sway violently across the track. The detached wheel assembly tore the car's structure and damaged the lap bar restraints, which then unlocked and released, throwing four riders from the car onto the concrete floor below, while the rest of the train continued into the final loop. Friction from the derailed car slowed the train so it could not clear the loop. It rolled backward, and the crippled car slammed into a concrete support pillar about midway down, bringing the train to an abrupt stop. Three of the four riders ejected from the car were killed, and the fourth was critically injured, while other passengers suffered minor injuries and were evacuated from the park. A formal inquiry found that four cap screws holding the bogie wheel assembly had failed from fatigue and that both design and maintenance shortcomings contributed to the collapse, prompting changes to the ride's trains and safety systems when Mindbender reopened the following year. Texas Giant Catapult. On July 19, 2013, at Six Flags Over Texas in Arlington, 52-year-old Rosa Ayala Gowana boarded the new Texas Giant and sat in the third row. While loading, she told ride attendants she was worried her lap restraint had only clicked once, and witnesses said others heard multiple clicks, though staff assured her a single click was sufficient. As the train plunged down the steep first drop, she was violently ejected, falling roughly 75 feet onto the metal roof of the honky-tonk tunnel and striking a support beam. Her body was found draped over the beam and the roof, a scene that made clear the force of the fall. An autopsy listed multiple traumatic injuries with extensive trauma to the torso, and investigators later concluded she was ejected as the train began the first large descent. The ride was closed for about 2 months while authorities reviewed the incident. The restraint system was later modified to include seat belts and redesigned harnesses, and Ayala Gowana's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit that was settled confidentially in 2014. Ride of Steel Ejection. On July 8, 2011, 29-year-old Iraq War veteran Sergeant James Thomas Hackemer was ejected from the Ride of Steel at Six Flags Darien Lake after being lifted from his front row seat as the train crested an airtime hill and struck the ground, suffering fatal blunt force trauma to the head. Hackemer, who had lost both legs in a 2008 roadside bomb, had been allowed to board despite the restraint system requiring riders to have both legs. Investigators cited operator error for permitting him to ride. The park closed the coaster for safety reviews and retraining, and later reached a confidential settlement with Hackemer's family to provide for his 2 young daughters. Yeah, Old Mill drowning. On August 3, 2005, 7-year-old John Kali Kasara of Norwalk, Connecticut, rode Rye Playland's Yeah, Old Mill, a slow-moving dark boat attraction with scenes of gnomes and trolls. Partway through the ride, he climbed out of his swan boat and slipped through an approximately 14-inch gap in the ride floor. He became wedged beneath the conveyor mechanism, where he was submerged in about 2.5 feet of water and out of the operator's sight and reach. Workers drained the ride and recovered his body from beneath the conveyor, and a coroner later ruled the death an accidental blunt head injury. The ride was closed and the gap sealed, and in 2009, John Kelly's family settled a wrongful death suit with Westchester County for $1.25 million, part of which funded a scholarship in his name for Playland employees. Seaworld's Orca attack. On February 24, 2010, Seaworld Orlando trainer Dawn Brancheau was finishing a Dine with Shamu show with Telecom, the largest orca at Seaworld Orlando. As part of the end-of-show routine, she was at the edge of the pool rubbing Tilikum's head and was lying next to him on a slide-out. All of a sudden, in an abrupt and violent action, Tilikum grabbed and pulled her into the pool. The orca then thrashed her around violently in the water before holding her underwater, preventing her from surfacing. Staff tried to distract the orca with nets and food, and eventually coaxed him into a smaller medical pool with a lift floor. About 40 to 45 minutes later, they raised the platform and recovered Dawn's body. The autopsy found she died of drowning and multiple traumatic injuries, including a severed spinal cord, fractures to the jaw, ribs, and a cervical vertebra, dislocated left elbow and knee, scalp torn off, and numerous bruises and lacerations. Thunder River Rapids tragedy. On October 25, 2016, at Dreamworld on Australia's Gold Coast, the Thunder River Rapids ride suffered a critical malfunction when one of the two main water pumps stopped and the ride's water level dropped, leaving an empty raft stranded on the conveyor rails near the unloading area. About a minute later, a second raft carrying 6 passengers rode onto the conveyor and struck the stalled raft, causing both rafts to pivot upward and then settle unevenly. The first raft dropped back onto the rails while the second tipped almost vertical, throwing some riders clear and trapping others against the conveyor mechanism. This resulted in the deaths of 4 passengers from crushing and traumatic injuries. Haunted Castle Inferno. On May 11, 1984, a fire broke out inside the haunted castle walkthrough at Six Flags Great Adventure in Jackson Township, New Jersey. The blaze began around 6:35 p.m. While roughly 29 guests were inside, 14 escaped, 7 were treated for smoke inhalation, and 8 teenagers aged 15 to 19 became trapped and died of smoke inhalation and carbon monoxide poisoning, many found within about 25 feet of an exit. Investigators concluded the fire was accidentally started when a visitor used a cigarette lighter in a dark corridor and ignited foam padding. The building had been built as a temporary structure without basic safety systems such as sprinklers, smoke detectors, or adequate alarms despite prior safety warnings, and the fire spread almost instantly because the attraction was constructed from highly flammable materials such as foam padding and plywood, and because the air conditioning helped push smoke and flames through the maze. The park and its parent company were later indicted on aggravated manslaughter charges but acquitted. The victims' families won civil settlements, and the disaster prompted stricter fire safety rules and enforcement for amusement attractions. Glenwood Caverns tragedy. On September 5, 2021, 6-year-old Wongol Estefanos boarded the haunted mine drop at Glenwood Caverns Adventure Park, and the ride began its normal cycle. As the carriage plunged, she separated from her seat and fell roughly 100 to 110 feet into the mine shaft, suffering blunt force trauma and later dying from her injuries. Park staff and emergency crews responded immediately, and the ride was closed. Later investigations found Wongol had been sitting on top of the lap belts instead of wearing them. 2 newly hired operators missed that during safety checks, and an alarm signaling a restraint problem was reset or overridden before dispatch. The haunted mine drop was permanently removed following this incident. Wongol's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the park, the ride manufacturer, and 2 ride operators. In September 2025, a civil jury found those defendants responsible for Wongol's death and ordered them to pay roughly $205 million in damages. If you like this video, subscribe for more.